The New Orleans Saints have an easy path to reconciliation when it comes to Derek Carr's contract, but it doesn't mean they have to take it. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints get a big-time hire on their defensive line coach that has another fan base very upset. We'll take a look at why the New Orleans Saints should be active in free agency, but there's a key that they need to remain disciplined in the meanwhile, and we're going to kick everything off with a look at Derek Carr's contract, which is the last remaining big hurdle for this New Orleans Saints team, and there are a lot of options about how they want to approach handling that. We got all that for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. Head over to FanDuel.com today. Put $5 down as your first bet. You can walk away with $150 in bonus bets. The New Orleans Saints have an easy path to relief when it comes to Derek Carr's salary cap number, which is expected to be, or which will be, as high as $51 million in terms of where things stand right now. They have an easy path to be able to knock some of that down, help them get closer to being under the salary cap, and even help them spend in free agency. But they don't necessarily have to take the easy road here. The easy road is to just simply do a full, standard, simple restructure of his contract, which I assume will be the kind of last option. It could very well be the first option, but I assume you're going to want to at least try to get something else done first, and then you always have the restructure to fall back on. That's previously negotiated into contracts. The player doesn't have to agree to anything. The player still gets the money. In fact, they get it a little bit up front. And so because of that, you end up as a team transitioning over to a signing bonus, and then you're paying it off over the course of, several years. You can add void years, all those other things. Not that it's going to matter, because once he's no longer on the roster, whatever the void years are, all accelerate to that season anyway. So there's no real need to add the void years, but you certainly can just in terms of managing your future cap number. That's the easy thing to do. You don't need to go into any negotiations. You don't have to get management to agree to it. You don't have to get the player to agree to it. There's nothing like that. You're not costing the player anything in that circumstance. So the Saints can always flip that quick switch if they want to go down that route. But I expect that this team will try to do the harder things first. I expect that they will approach him about a pay cut, even though he has publicly said, and unsolicited, by the way, that he would not take a pay cut in an earlier conversation at the end of this year with ESPN's Kat Terrell. It doesn't matter if he said that. You still go to him and you make him tell you no, right? You still go to the representation and make them tell you no. It's not a situation in which you say, well, he's already said via the press that he's not going to do that, so we're not even going to ask. No, you absolutely ask. Like, there has to be some reality here in terms of understanding where Derek Carr is, where he is in his career, and where the New Orleans Saints are just in terms of the state of the team. They're not in a situation to where you're necessarily trying to pay Derek Carr to take you to a Super Bowl. Certainly, you hope that that's the case if you're the New Orleans Saints, especially buying back into this for another year. But when it comes down to it, that's not what your expectation realistically is. Everybody has to have a realistic understanding, even if it's not shared publicly, of where this franchise is and where this organization is, which is not in a bad place. It's just that they're not the front runners for their division. They're not the front runners for their conference. They're not the favorites in anything at the moment. That's the outside perception of them. The inside perception is probably a little bit more favorable than that. Certainly should be, right? You don't want the team to walk in and say, well, we stink. You know what I mean? You don't want that kind of attitude coming from your front office and from your players and from your quarterback and your head coach and all of this stuff. Of course, that's not the case. But this New Orleans Saints team has to understand the reality of where it is, just in terms of money and their situation, their cap situation, where things can be in another year and another couple of years, which is kind of grass is greener on the other side type of outlook. But there's some awareness for that. no one's going to be lying inside that building about where they are. And so I imagine that there is some kind of happy medium for both the player, Derek Carr, and the organization, the New Orleans Saints, to potentially find another way to adjust the contract. The concern is that typically in order for you to reach that kind of Goldilocks zone in negotiations, if you're a team, you're asking the player to take less money now, and in exchange, you're probably having to guarantee some money in the future. That could be a tough thing to get the New Orleans Saints to do. They only have about $60 million of salary cap space next year, but that's because they only have 45 players on their roster going into next season. They have to double up that roster. Not only the top 51 actually count against your salary cap, but you're expecting to go into 2026 after this year, ready to build and compete and do all of those things. Does guaranteeing money to a quarterback that might not make it through this 2025 season, health-wise, and that might not make it into the 2026 season on your roster, is that a wise move? That's where you get into the situation that people have kind of created around the New Orleans Saints that, oh, if you touch his contract, then you're married to him for another year, another 2 years. That doesn't happen if you just restructure the deal. You'll have to eat some dead money, but NFL teams are showing more and more that they're willing to do that, especially at the quarterback position, and especially if you're transitioning from that amount of dead money to a quarterback on a rookie contract, which is what we saw in, it's what we're going to see in Atlanta. It's what we saw in Denver. It's what they tried to do a version of back in the day in Pittsburgh. Like, we're seeing this all over the place in terms of how teams manage it. It's what the Giants are hoping to do here soon, right? Moving off of Daniel Jones, eating that contract, eating all of that dead cap, that salary, all that kind of stuff. And they're hoping that maybe they land their next quarterback in this year's draft. Good luck. But teams are showing that they're willing to do that. And so the New Orleans Saints could be just another one of those teams. So the easy button is the restructure. The challenging part becomes trying to rework a deal and trying to find a way to do it in such a way that if you guarantee money in the future, you're not doing it to the point to where you're stuck and not able to make a change or make a shift or anything like that. I don't think that if you're the New Orleans Saints, you're willing to buy into 2026 with Derek Carr until you see 2025 with Derek Carr and Kellen Moore. I don't think you're willing to go in, if you're a head coach, showing up for the first year of your deal, which is now effectively a gap year for Kellen Moore because it's not his quarterback, it's the Saints quarterback, right? In terms of the negotiation side of what he gets to say, right? Hey, I didn't get to pick my quarterback when I showed up, right? This is similar to Dennis Allen inheriting Jameis Winston. Kellen Moore is inheriting Derek Carr. So more than likely 2026 is when he's able to go out there and make his pick at quarterback. I think you will see that. They let Dennis Allen do it. He's a defensive head coach. You got to let Kellen Moore do it too. And so unless Derek Carr has a great 2025, I wouldn't expect to see him in 2026, at least not in a Saints uniform. So the Saints will have to figure out a way to rework or renegotiate that deal if they don't want to go the restructure route, which is fine, but not guaranteeing a ton of money to the point to where they get married to him in 2026. And then Kellen Moore goes into a second year without having chosen his quarterback, which I think would then be something that even if Derek Carr turns out to do well over the course of these next couple of years, that's a disservice to Kellen Moore. You got to let the head coach come in and choose their quarterback, especially the offensive play caller and the offensive head coach. So this is the last big hurdle for the New Orleans Saints. They have an easy road. They have an easy button, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to take it. I think they should try to go the tough road and try to find another way to make money this season off of his contract, but they have to be careful about how they do it. If it turns into guaranteeing a future at the quarterback position, you got to go with a simple restructure in that case. But I like the idea of at least having the conversations before that to see what you can get done. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints will be active in free agency, but it doesn't mean that they need to be desperate, and it certainly doesn't mean that they need to overspend. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, who makes the NBA season even more exciting. And don't worry, even if you miss tip-off, you don't get that opening spread or that opening money line. It just shifts and moves all throughout the game for live betting. I absolutely love live betting, same game parlays, whole bunch of stuff that you can get into, take advantage of a big scoring run, bet on that fourth quarter comeback. There's a ton that you can check out over at FanDuel, and it's even better for new customers. New customers at FanDuel.com Put $5 down for your first bet. If you win that, you can get $150 in bonus bets that you can then use on other odds, lines, props, same game parlays, a whole bunch of stuff. You can find it over at FanDuel.com. That's where you go for your chance at $150 over at FanDuel.com. The Oklahoma City Thunder, 11-point favorites over the Atlanta Hawks. Great first $5 bet where you can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints are going to be active in free agency, according to Mickey Loomis, more active than last year, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get to a point where they're going to be desperate or undisciplined. And I think that is a good choice for the New Orleans Saints. I've got 3 reasons why. The first of which is that undisciplined teams get undisciplined in free agency. It's just bad practice. The offseason winners who go out there and spend the most money are rarely ever the teams that finish at the top. It happens. Don't get me wrong. It happens. I think there's an example from just this past year to where it does happen, but it's typically a lot less than the 32 teams that there are. And so it's not necessarily a situation where the Saints have to go. The Saints can land big names, but I would expect them to probably start backloading contracts again. I'll explain why in reason number 2. Reason number 2 that I think that they have the ability to go out there and be more active, but not necessarily be undisciplined, is because they have money to spend in their future. 2026, there's only 45 players on the roster. Therefore, they have $60 million left to spend. Now, there's going to be more charges that are going to hit when players get released and numbers accelerate and all that other stuff. But you're always kind of borrowing from your future if you're managing the cap the way that the New Orleans Saints have. And so that's okay. You can manage that. In 2027, over $200 million left in terms of, or open in terms of the salary cap. Again, that's going to decrease as more transactions are made, more contracts are signed, and more contracts are terminated, which causes dead money to set in and will eat away at that cap number and things like that. But also, the Saints only have 28 players under contract in 2027. So there's a good share in terms of what you're able to dip into. A vet minimum deal with a heavy signing bonus and then a backloaded non-guaranteed 2027, a backloaded non-guaranteed 2028. Saints can kind of get back to doing the backloaded contract stuff that they've done before in the past, but not get to the point to where they're restructuring guys well into their 30s and into their 40s, which is what put them in this bind to begin with, along with the COVID collapse of the salary cap. Reason number 3, free agency class isn't great, so it should be easy to stay disciplined. I think you go and spend at left guard. I think that's a spot where you go and spend. And the Saints have needs everywhere on their team. Let's not get it twisted. But where they have their biggest needs, not super inspiring. So go and spend at left guard. What's the other big need? Wide receiver? Not really a lot of inspiring guys hitting the free agency market. Go and get a value signing there. Look to the draft in terms of your ability to be able to draft and grow. Part of the reasons why we never see those big spending teams end up with consistent success on a year-to-year basis is because they're not growing their own talent. They're not growing for their future. They're buying for their present. And so the Saints are in the process of trying to grow for their future. Don't go trying to buy for your present. You don't need to prove anything in 2025. Get ready for 2026, 2027, and your future beyond that. So your ability to be able to kind of backload those contracts and things like that, I think that will help you. And again, this free agency class isn't super exciting at many of the positions. Tight end, better draft class than free agency class. Wide receiver, better draft class than free agency class. Defensive tackle, defensive end. You might be able to find some guys you can bring in, like a T.R. Tart is still one of my favorite additions possible for this New Orleans Saints team. If Leonard Floyd gets cut, he would be a great addition for this team if he gets cut in Buffalo. Real opportunities for you to be able to add veterans that are going to have an impact for you. But you also have a fantastic defensive tackle draft class and a fantastic edge rusher draft class that you can dip into as well. So there's just no need to be undisciplined. How will the New Orleans Saints even find money to spend, you might ask? Well, let's dive into exactly that. Let's say that the Saints take the easy road, right? They hit the easy button on Derek Carr. They simply restructure his contract. That's $31 million gone off of the deal at that point. So that takes them from around $46, $47 million over the salary cap to about $16 million over the salary cap, 16, 17, somewhere right in between there. You do a restructure to Eric McCoy, which saves you $6.7 million. That brings you down to $9.7 million over the salary cap. You do another restructure on Cesar Ruiz, $6.38 million. That ends up leaving you with $3.4 million left in terms of your overage. And then you restructure Carl Granderson, who comes in saving you $5.2 million. And then all of a sudden you're $1 million in the black. You're $1 million positive. That way you have not restructured anybody over the age of 30, and you've restructured guys that are on contracts that have been built to restructure. Eric McCoy's contract was built to restructure. Cesar Ruiz's contract was built to restructure. Same thing with Carl Granderson. These are recently signed deals that are built to do this with. And there you go. You got $1 million in salary cap space. And then after that, everything that you do creates spending opportunities for you. If you can save $9 million on pay cuts with Taysom Hill and Cam Jordan, let's say that they're able to figure that out somehow, $10 million to spend. If you make another move to where you decide, you know what, really going to revamp this defensive line, going to move on from Colin Saunders that saves $2.5 million and Nathan Shepard who saves $1.2 million. And then bang, you're even further into the green there with an additional about $4 or $5 million on top of that. So you're into the $15 million range. And then there's all the cuts that no one ever talks about. Ben DiNucci is on this roster right now, taking up over $1 million. Goodbye. That's an easy $1.03 million to make. So there's the real opportunities to be able to do all that. So even without, so I processed all this. I didn't process the 2 pay cuts for Cam Jordan and Taysom Hill. $6.6 million under the salary cap. You've impacted your future numbers a little bit. $56 million in 2026, $209 million in 2027. Those numbers are going to change based on dead money and all that other kind of stuff. Worry about that later. That would all be a part of the consideration anyway. And then if you're able to save $8 million on a Taysom Hill pay cut as well as a Cam Jordan pay cut, let's just say the Saints go that route, then you've gone from $6 million to spend to $14 million to spend, plus additional moves that you still have available to make. So there's a real chance here that the Saints are hovering somewhere around $20 million to spend by the time that they get to free agency opening up on March 12th. Doesn't mean that they're going to open up $20 million right away. They might open up to $4 or $5 million, spend some of that money, open up another $4 or $5 million, spend some of that money, open up another, so on and so forth. Like they kind of do this incrementally sometimes. Other times they just open up a big fat stack of cash and then they go out there and spend that. But I think that being disciplined with it is going to be key. 1-year deals, 2-year deals, anything more than that, backload it, throw it into 2027, 2028, non-guaranteed. That way you can get out of it when you need to, all those other things. A $20 million per year deal. I'm not saying they're going to give anybody a $20 million per year deal, but I'm just for nuance sake, a $20 million per year deal does not cost you $20 million in 2024. In 2025. Doesn't have to. You can give the low veteran minimum. You can give the big signing bonus. You can push stuff in the future years. As long as you don't turn around and start restructuring that money on a bunch of guys that are getting a little bit too long in the tooth for the NFL, you're not going to end up back in this situation because that salary cap's only going to go up and up and up and up and up. Remember, it's supposed to be over $300 million as soon as potentially next year, but will certainly be over $300 million, maybe even $310 million come 2027. So it's really not that challenging. You just got to figure out how you want to get things started with Derek Carr in terms of his contract. And then after that, it's all about being active, but not getting desperate, not getting undisciplined and staying measured. I think the New Orleans Saints should be able to do that in this free agency class. Coming up next, boy, did the New Orleans Saints get a big time hire for their defensive line. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints got a massive hire at defensive line coach, and it has made one fan base in Louisiana very, very angry, very upset. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we are here for you every single day, every Monday through Friday and Saturday and Sunday with bonus episodes. The Saturday and Sunday episodes tend to come out a little bit later, just so I can enjoy my weekend a little bit, but usually try to have the morning episodes up and during the weekdays up in the morning. Or at least early afternoon. So make sure you're coming through every single day here. Fresh episode, Locked On Saints, giving you everything that you need on the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints hired Bo Davis, and it was an absolute hit. Absolute hit. Bo Davis is the new New Orleans Saints defensive line coach. Who is Bo Davis? You wonder. The McGee, Mississippi native, 54 years old, graduated from LSU, spent 3 years playing at LSU as well. He was 2000 and it was there for 1990 through 1992. And he is now the defensive line coach for the New Orleans Saints. I want to highlight two things. I want to highlight one thing that has now happened twice. The Saints have found a way to hire two very well-respected SEC coaches away from high-paying, secure jobs to join their staff on defense. They did it with Terry Joseph, bringing him back home to New Orleans. They've done it now with Bo Davis, who was most recently the LSU defensive line coach, but has spent a lot of time in a lot of different places as well. But this is really interesting. Really, really interesting. Because by every measure, I mean, even when I talked about guys like Kirby Moore, potentially, being somebody to watch for the staff. He's the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Mizzou, the younger brother of Kellen Moore. I was basically told I don't see him leaving an SEC job where he's getting paid a lot of money to go and be a position coach or an offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints. A position coach is probably more likely. And I completely bought that. I completely understand that. These are a little bit different. We're talking about more, these aren't coordinators. These are position coaches or assistant coaches. But the Saints are kind of nailing this right now with all of the collegiate things. And honestly, I said two SEC schools, but really, I mean, you also pulled somebody from Cal, which is a pretty cushy situation to be in when it came to the addition of Peter Sirmon as their linebackers coach. So you've got three hires on the defensive side of the football so far, all three of them coming up from the college ranks. Two of them, it's their first ever NFL job. Terry Joseph coming in as we assume the team's defensive passing game coordinator, and then Peter Sirmon coming over as the linebackers coach. But Bo Davis is a little unique. He's been in the NFL before. He was the Miami Dolphins assistant defensive line coach in 2006, and he was a defensive line coach for the Detroit Lions 2018 through 2020. And so this is a guy that's bringing NFL experience, but is coming back from the SEC. And here's the thing that I think is most important, maybe not most important, but here's the thing that I think makes the most sense of why Bo Davis gets hired. There's no overlap with Brandon Staley when it comes to Bo Davis. My understanding is that Bo Davis was actually on the Saints' radar before they even hired Brandon Staley. And so taking that into account, what is it that makes him so appealing? What makes him so appealing is actually the same thing that makes him a unique fit for Brandon Staley in particular. He was the LSU, he was at LSU, he was a graduate assistant 1995 to 1997. And then was an assistant strength and conditioning coach from 2002 through 2005. Now, the reason why that's important is because when they brought him in 2023, which is where he helped to win that national championship game, he was actually retained by Les Miles. Before he was retained by Les Miles, he was working with Nick Saban. So then he leaves LSU to take an assistant defensive line coach job in the NFL in 2006 with the Miami Dolphins. Who was the head coach in the NFL the 1 year, right? Nick Saban. Bo Davis's next job, Alabama, defensive line coach 2007 to 2010, worked with Nick Saban. Ended up going to Texas to be a defensive line coach for a couple years there, 2011 to 2013. I believe he was working with Sark at that time. No, he was with Mac Brown. Sorry, he was with Mac Brown at that time. Then he goes from Mac Brown. Where does he go? He goes back to Nick Saban, replacing Chris Rumph in 2014, 2015. Then he interned with the Jacksonville Jaguars and then went on. Okay, I'm not going to go through his entire coaching resume. I went through half of it, though, because I wanted to stress how much this dude has worked with Nick Saban. And the reason why I think that is something teams desire is that you have demonstrable success from Bo Davis. Bo Davis is one of the most highly respected defensive line coaches in college and in the pros. Everyone knows this guy. Everyone loves this guy. He was going to get a lot of money to return to LSU. He got a lot of money last year to be at LSU. He's probably getting something close to that with the New Orleans Saints, which means Gail Benson opened up the checkbook to do that. Why do you do that? Well, I think one of the big things is that you see demonstrable success, but you also see him mentored by one of the greatest to ever coach in Nick Saban. And so you get that bloodline, you get that tree, but it also makes Bo Davis a significantly good fit with Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley's defense does a lot of pattern matching. We've talked about that before here on the show, but as a corner or as a secondary, as a defensive back, you end up driving back into coverage, and then you're waiting to see what the release is by the opposing wide receivers. Who's going inside, who's going outside, based on who the inside receiver is, who the outside receiver is. There's a list of rules where this person becomes your guy, that person becomes that guy's guy, that person becomes that guy's guy. Like it's a whole thing. We'll dive into it when we get back to midweek fundamentals as we get ready for the draft and stuff like that. But because of that, Brandon Staley using that in his defense, that was a big part of Nick Saban's defense too. It was the rip Liz defense, which is rip right, Liz left. That's all that means. Who's going right, who's going left, all those other things. Right? It was code name, I guess you can say, for that. It's that same similar type of defense, right? Similar type of concept, similar type of system. Probably uses different terminology and stuff like that for sure. And there's other things that are different. But Bo Davis has been in that defense. So you might be saying, well, Russ, that has more to do with the secondary than it has to do with the defensive line. So why does it matter that the defensive line coach has experience in that? It means everything. Because it's not the same type of coverage that supports your rush as you would see in a typical cover 3 defense or in a typical Tampa 2 defense and things like that. So the defensive line has to act a certain way. They've got to produce because you have to give that secondary, if you can force that quarterback to move off his spot, you're giving that secondary the opportunity to be able to read exactly what's going on and make those adjustments and make those changes. The way to beat that rip Liz, that pattern matching defense is to operate on time, which means you got to get to the quarterback fast, quickly. That's why it's different than Dennis Allen's system, which relied on coverage for defensive lines to be able to get to the quarterback on second and third efforts. Now, first effort, you want to at least get that quarterback off of their spot. So I think this is a fantastic hire for the New Orleans Saints. Bo Davis was a nose guard, nose tackle himself. He's a guy that has that experience, knows exactly how to coach that. That's going to be a new, effectively, endeavor for the New Orleans Saints when they go into those 3-man fronts. That's going to be one of the most consequential hires that this team makes in 2025. And I love the hire of Bo Davis. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we will have been through a couple days of combine workouts, who stood out, and who should you be going back to the tape on. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's show. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL Draft. They're doing it like nobody else does. Every single day, new shows covering everything going on with the NFL Combine. Damian and Keith. Keith, of course, Louisiana native, New Orleans Saints fan, so go and show him some love. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.